Okay, so welcome back to. Oh, I'm getting incoming emergency transition, Martin. Hang on.
No.
Oh, hang on. It's coming through. I'm just going to patch it through into the podcast now. Yep. Ah, you see, it's Jimmy Olsen from the DC Cinematic Universe reports here. You see, just coming in with a hot scoop. Batman is back, better than ever, and he's come off the My Chemical Romance reunion tour. Ah, you see, it's Jimmy Olsen. Welcome to Movies and Martins.
Wow.
Well, we need something for the cold open.
Yeah, we do. We always do.
Better than Sneaky Wizards. Speaking of Sneaky Wizards, let's talk about the DC Cinematic Universe. Oh, great.
Oh,
okay.
God. Welcome to Movies and Martins mini-sode on the DC Cinematic Universe.
Ooh, very professional introduction, yeah.
Thank you.
A mini-sode, yeah. Again, it is the very sometimes weekly at the moment because of my editing schedule, movie podcast featuring two boys called Martin. As always, that is still the gimmick. We haven't thought of anything more interesting yet. When we do, we'll let you know. Today's episode, we're reacting. I guess it's almost like a reaction. I don't like doing like reactions to trailers. We do it a lot on our radio show when we used to. Like, I don't think like advertisements for films should count as news or should be treated as such, because that's sort of what they're there. That's kind of the point. That I'm not going to do the marketing director's job for him, but.
Yeah.
We've seen sort of a couple of trailers for a couple of new films from DC and Warner Brothers, the kind of conglomerate there that's, I guess, paired against Marvel and Disney, and is losing. But I'm not going to take a side. I'm not going to trump the horn of the biggest corporation conglomerate we've ever seen. I'm really excited for the Amazon Cinematic Universe we're going to get eventually. That's going to be great.
Welcome to the Google Earth Cinematic Universe.
Welcome to the Google... starring such lovely Google characters as the Doodle from Mary Curie's Anniversary... and Alan Turing, and also the Olympics one where it was all the different coloured rings.
The villain is just everyone's questionable search history, isn't it? That's just...
You have to. The film is all about a race to delete Martin Shaw's search history.
How very day.
I am very proud of my disgusting searches. How dare you, sir? Anyway, so we're talking a bit about... the reason we're looking at some of these new trailers that released from DC films is because I think we both saw it shows a really interesting trend for how they're treating their idea of a cinematic universe. The MCU is probably one of the dominant and most marketable and... richest, I guess, like runs of a shared cinematic universe you ever see. What was your kind of memory of DC's kind of grab for the title of the best cinematic universe for superheroes? What was your kind of recollection of that?
I mean, it kind of came at this just a couple of years later, so it's kind of like, well, we've had successful installments of like isolated DC characters, so we've had like the classic like Superman movies, then like Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, and like you've had Batman previously, but they haven't really attempted any sort of crossover films. So naturally they saw like Marvel starting to use some of their core characters, so they sort of spring up out of nowhere. You get things like Man of Steel kind of setting the tone for what you can expect from their cinematic universe, which is rather than sort of serious but fun in a lot of cases movies on the Marvel side, you're getting a real sort of brooding, overwhelming sort of dark edge to all these characters. The sort of the human cost and everything else is supposed to be dealt with properly and emotively, and it's just not. It feels quite hollow. Is the best way I would say it. Is just they've artificially made them the counterparts, even though Superman, Batman, the Flash, etc., can be just as wacky and dumb as some of Marvel's plot lines. But instead, you've got these stupid, grounded, and really just edgy characters.
Yeah.
It's not very good, basically.
Yeah. So the films, suffice to say, not had the same success as kind of Martin's sort of description of it there has. Man of Steel did very well. I think Man of Steel's an okay film. It's not a bad film necessarily.
I think they're sort of relatively successful in terms of financials, but in terms of they just
actual execution
come off as pale imitations.
Yeah, well, I suppose I don't think the pale imitations thing was quite as pronounced when they were sort of started to be released, because you saw as much as Man of Steel maybe didn't accomplish all it tried to do with its rehabilitation and reimagining of the Superman character, it certainly did, at least when Man of Steel was released, have a very distinctive tone compared to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which, like you described, was kind of a bit more wacky, a bit more tongue-in-cheek. So I think it might be sort of an interesting way to think about it, as what Marvel have really done is almost like the genius, if you will, of what they managed to accomplish with the MCU is they've taken the same kind of tone you get from a comic book, or you would have got from a comic book if you were reading it back then when they were released, translated that to the most profitable medium, which is film, or the most marketable medium at the moment, which is film, and translated that same kind of there's elements of realism, but it's elements of camp as well mixed in quite deeply with that. They've updated it to not be completely laughable like some of the costumes and things you saw back then, but they've got this kind of, like you said, the kind of elements of snark and jokiness is kind of almost the modern translation, I suppose, of the wackiness you'd see in earlier cartoons, which are made for kids. Whereas that kind of snarkiness and sassiness was devoid from the DC Cinematic Universes. Humorless, I think, is a decent way to describe. There are some like moments of levity in Man of Steel, but it's not that much.
Yeah, and
which I think. Yeah, sorry, Karen.
The funniest moments from things like Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Justice and things are not moments that you're meant to find funny whatsoever. Like the two warring characters knowing each other's names, each other's mother's names, and that's the reason they stop trying to kill each other.
Do you want to know what on reflection, what I find exceptionally funny about that? So this plot point for Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice, wherein it's both the characters, their mothers have the same the same name. The names are Martha Wayne and Martha Kent, and that's when Batman's about to be defeated by Superman. Is that right? Or is it? No.
Batman's about to stab Superman with this kryptonite spear, which is going to kill him.
Yeah.
You were never a god. You were never even a man. You're letting him kill Martha. What does that mean? Why did you say that name? Fine.
Yeah, I remember this. Yeah, he's gonna actually do an actual murder, and kill Superman entirely with a kryptonite spear. And then Superman says his mother's name, which is Martha, and they bond over that. And because he hears the word Martha, he's like, "What?" I've realised that critical plot point of a multi-million-dollar released film directed by an actual real director. This plot point has the same amount of weight to it as the joke we make at the opening of each podcast that we're both called Martin.
Oh, I hate it, but
think
it's
about that
true.
for a second.
I hate it, but it's true.
So this kind of gives you a glimpse that they kind of go for a certain tone and don't always hit it with what they're going for. And you saw an interesting change in that, I think, with the Justice League film. Did you watch this film, Justice League?
I've still not seen the original 2017 Justice League because all I've heard
made
is
a good choice.
It's a bad film. And I think, from what I gather from it, both from Suicide Squad's sort of drastic attempt to change tones almost in terms of to become more self-referential and a bit jokey, which just played really weirdly with the fact that the plot was still one of these sort of grimdark ones, and then
Suicide Squad tried to pick up on, I guess, the Deadpool momentum you saw, which was kind of like had a bit more of a darker edge to it, but was making jokes and references constantly, and that was kind of what Suicide Squad went for, I think.
Yeah,
kind of it
sort of runs up against the world-ending plot that's still at the core of the movie. That you also have jokes about like masturbation and stuff in it, and then just from that into Suicide Squad, I've sort of from Suicide Squad into Justice League rather.
Justice League, yeah.
I've heard that they tried to shift more back into sort of more typical representations of superheroes, and that they try and insert elements of humor in, but it doesn't really land.
Yeah, so what I watched this film on a plane, and it did put me to sleep twice. It's not a very engaging film. Part of that reaction to it is actually because of, well, we've seen recently, one of the trailers we want to talk about today is a trailer for the SNYDER Cut of Justice League. So during the production of Justice League, unfortunately, obviously it's really terrible for him, I believe.
There was a family tragedy, which was touted as the reason he was leaving his directorial responsibilities.
So he kind of abdicated the directorial role, as you would do in that instance, and Warner Brothers, rather than waiting for him to pick up and redo the film, they gave it to another director, which was Joss Whedon of Buffy and MCU fame. He directed did he direct the first Avengers film?
Yeah, and then he did Age of Ultron, and then
Age of Ultron
departed because he said he hated it.
So then he said he hated doing Age of Ultron, and that's fine because I hated the film. And then he was offered probably more money than he'd ever seen in his life with picking up the directorial role for the mainline DC Cinematic Universe film. And so he took that up, and he kind of Whedoned all over it. So all the kind of the snark and sass you see in an Avengers film, which works with how the tone functions, he took up elements of a pre-cut Snyder film, because it was quite far into the production cycle. They looked at it, some people called it unwatchable, and then he basically recut it, reshot loads of scenes, which include Henry Cavill with a digitally altered upper lip to remove a mustache that he refused to he'd grown for a different film and refused to shave it off.
He wasn't refused, he was contractually obliged to keep it for Mission Impossible Fallout, so they just had to digitize out this mustache in every scene he's in. Because he was still by that point he was mid-shoot on Mission Impossible, so he had to keep himself for that one, because that was his main obligation at that point.
Yeah. And so this new Whedon cut of this unwatchable film came out, and it was still completely unwatchable. It was made worse by the kind of attempts at humour that weren't carried by the film's tone at all. That really jarring. It takes like 10 to 20 seconds at a time for a punchline, then a reaction from another character. It did not function very well, and you could tell due to like different hairstyles between cuts which bits had been which shots had been reshot and cut in afterwards. Like Bruce Wayne's hairstyle changes completely from like a more matted one to an upped quiff in one cut. And moments like that, and like the color grade or the costumes even change between like certain cuts. It's really quite transparent where it's been cut. And so DC have released a trailer for the Justice League, the SNYDER Cut, which is allegedly Snyder been allowed to go back, recut the film as he sees fit with the things he had shot, and that's the kind of release that they're pushing for in 2021. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's exclusive to HBO Max, their HBO streaming service. It's going to be 4 hours long, released in... I don't know if it's been released in 1 hour segments or it's meant to just be watched in 1 hour segments, but that's sort of what they're saying. So it's now a superhero film that's going to be picking up the pieces from what ostensibly was the smashing of two drastically different films into one film in 2017, is now a 4 hour marathon experience of a cut that people have been crying out for, and Zack Snyder himself was dropping hints of throughout 2019 that did exist, that was sometimes shrouded in mystery, sometimes was definitely not real. was downplayed by Warner Brothers for the longest time, and then they somehow see some faith in it, despite the fact that even Zack Snyder's original cut, when it was first sort of being assembled, was unwatchable.
Allegedly, yeah.
Oh, what a mess.
Yeah, it's an absolute complete mess.
Guy's probably fought hundreds of thousands of other super beings on the other planets he's destroyed, right? And we have to assume he's won.
I don't care how many demons he's fought and how many hells. He's never fought us. Not us united.
But yeah, I found it really interesting. This we talked about it in the idea of auteur theory, like the idea of a filmmaker who has a very strong vision. And I think the fact they're releasing a recut of a Snyder film as per Snyder's direct autorial vision kind of undermines the film that's previously been released as a text, as a definitive episode in the Snyderverse DC Cinematic Universe thing, which makes me think this idea they're going for a kind of more grim, dark cinematic universe has basically fallen apart, and they're just now a selection of different, almost different studios making films, DC films. I'm not against that as a concept, but they don't seem to quite have copped to that being the full collapse of the cinematic universe as it was. I mean, you saw Affleck was marked for a Batman film, which he would also direct. Is that right?
Yeah. And that's gone.
And then that's gone. That's completely gone. He decided he didn't want to do it, so that's completely out. And now we have Patterson returning as Robert Pattinson, which is very exciting.
Robert Pattinson. That's very good.
Thank you. So we're gonna get that coming. You really enjoyed that joke, didn't you?
That's very good.
He's still laughing, audience. So we're going to get a Robert Pattinson as Batman coming out, which they've also just dropped the trailer for, which is coming out in 2021 as well, which we've seen so many soft reboots of different characters from this franchise that it's definitely no longer a cinematic universe. I mean, we've seen... This will be the third Joker in about 5 years we've seen from DC, so you had... what's his name? Jared Leto's Joker, you had Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, and now you've got a kind of more disambiguated, like kind of more diluted idea of the Joker that you see appearing in the trailer for this Batman film. The tone was interesting on this one, wasn't it? In the kind of what you saw in this trailer.
It's very interesting. So,
From your secret friend.
Underneath the bridge,
Who?
Topper sprung a leak, and the animals I've trapped
Haven't a clue.
all become my pet.
Let's play a game. Just me and you. Any of this mean anything to you?
so it seems to be, from what you get, although they only have about 30% of the film assembled, which for me makes this trailer more impressive because it's the most exciting thing that I saw from all these DC announcements for me.
Yeah.
It seems to me sort of a relatively early career Batman. And I think they seem to be shooting for sort of a younger... he's already Batman, so it's not... It doesn't feel like it's going to be an origin story as such, but it feels more like...
Thank God.
Like the comic book I would sort of align it with is maybe Batman Year One.
Is that the Miller run, or is that the...
I think so. I'm not big on comics, as just a
yeah.
So I think it is Miller, but it's like some of the first horrible things he deals with, sort of as he finds his feet, is this the Cape Crusader, and it's like, I think that's a really interesting take because we've seen Origin Batman loads of times, and we've seen off the back of that really sort of like reserved and sort of really jaded Batmans from different characters, whereas this one seems to strike that sort of middle ground of, right, well, he's become the Batman, what's he actually doing and what does that really mean? I think it's going to be a really interesting... It feels like it's an interesting exploration of the character for me.
It's an interesting story to take... well, if they are going for the Year One thing, because that's sort of one of Frank Miller's pieces before. He just sort of revealed he was quite fascistic at various points. But yeah, so Year One was quite a well-renowned comic at the time, so it'd be interesting to see how they adapt that. And so do you think that they're maybe shooting for Pattinson being a younger version of Batfleck? Do you think that's maybe the idea?
I don't think they're trying to link them because they're doing other things elsewhere. I mean, with crossovers with the TV shows, the Arrowverse TV shows, and all sorts of things. I think, building off what you were saying earlier, it really does feel like they're kind of exploding out of this single core universe because there's potential plans for other versions of the characters to appear in the TV shows, or maybe the TV show characters appear in the films. So, for example, Ezra Miller's Flash, so from the Justice League film, showed up in the Flash TV show in a Crisis on Infinite Earths event.
Oh, so they're kind of doing a kind of maybe a multiverse take on it.
And similarly, in a panel on the Flash movie, so the 2022 Flash movie with Ezra Miller's Flash, there was concept art showing the Flash teaming up with Michael Keaton Batman.
Oh, that's fun.
So I think everything seems to point, and we'll talk about Suicide, the Suicide there. We'll talk about the James Gunn Suicide Squad in relation to this, I think, as well. They seem to be very much moving away from Marvel's cinematic universe as a model.
Strict cinematic universe.
And instead going, actually, no, we can have multiple versions of our characters, and that's fine, because people who are watching the films aren't adhering to a canon as comic book readers are. As such,
I find that really, so I think what they tried to do at the start with their DC Cinematic Universe was they tried to play catch up, like you said, with Marvel and their linear established universe, and obviously that fails because they didn't have the 10 years of backing that Marvel did before they released Batman vs Superman to try and kind of cash in on that. So I think it's quite a smart plan if this is what they're doing, to pivot to a multiverse strategy where the films can just be released, they're not related at all, and if you interlink them in the television shows is a very smart way to do that.
I think it'll sort of almost pivot the studios over one another. So people from like Marvel fans have long been crying out for them to cross over with their like the Netflix properties. So Daredevil, and Jessica Jones especially. Yeah, because Charlie Cox is a brilliant Daredevil. That's just he's great.
He's very good. Yeah,
and with rumors that Daredevil might be showing up in the Spider-Man movies, it's like people were pushing for him. Whereas here, we're seeing a much greater involvement with their TV shows rather than like the Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of events from the films will affect the TV show a little bit. This is we're going to create this expansive media thing that's bigger than our films, but in a meaningful way.
What I think is a smart move as well is using this multiverse strategy of like having different things sort of sporadically linked through the idea of this randomly overlapping set of universes that intersect. What you can do is you can just make a bunch of films and decide how you want to link them later on.
Yeah.
And it kind of, if the only people paying attention to that kind of stuff are going to be watching the TV shows, I think that's then quite a handy trick, because then you can sort of make it make sense in terms of the world of the TV show. It doesn't have to adhere to canon outside of it, apart from aesthetically, which I think you see actually tonally and aesthetically, these films largely try to hit similar points. Have a much darker tone, a much more gritty sort of, maybe realistic portrayals of violence isn't quite the right word, but certainly much more grounded or much more dark vision of what superhero violence looks like than the Marvel films have, which is very comic booky, punching you around. Yeah. It's not as brutal.
The warehouse fight in Batman vs Superman, which is a brilliant,
really well directed fight.
Brilliant sequence.
And then how Pattinson's Batman treats a villain he fights in this trailer, where he just beats him, and says, "I am vengeance," or something like that. So it's like a very much darker kind of idea of what it is.
The hell are you supposed to be? I'm vengeance.
So maybe, and even Shazam, even though that was a much more lighter toned film, the actual aesthetically, I thought it looked very similar to all of the other Zack Snyder films that were brought out, like in terms of the type of camera lens they use, the kind of wash they put over, the kind of lightly bluish wash you see over every sort of DC film like that. Which is what I really liked about the new Batman trailer, was it looked very dark, and the darks were very contrasting with all the other parts. Which I guess brings us on to, if we're talking about spiritual successes and kind of rough linkages, we'll just talk very briefly about this. Because the Suicide Squad trailer that was released wasn't really a trailer as such. It was a bit of dialogue over some mock-up cartoons of the characters in their roles with the actors. and it started with like a minute or so of dialogue, and then became just like a flash cut of who's in the film.
You know the deal. Successfully complete the mission, you get 10 years off your sentence.
You're my dream, you're my nightmare. Life is a breeze, you don't fight fair.
Welcome to Task Force X. These are your brothers and sisters for the next few days.
Run away from the pain, I don't care. 'Cause I think I need some guiding. All the kids don't stand a chance.
Yeah, it's almost like a sizzle reel, and there's another one that they released via the Suicide Squad, which is the confusing title that this not sequel has to Suicide Squad. This is the Suicide Squad. Some might suggest they're trying to create a definitive version of the movie. It's very good. On their Twitter account,
I'm Batman. No, I am the Batman.
I'm the Batman. Yeah. So the Suicide Squad movie Twitter account
It's my mum, the Martha. Sorry, carry on.
They released a sort of 2-minute-ish sizzle reel of brief talking heads from some of the actors and James Gunn, writer director.
Yeah.
And just
cool.
almost behind the scenes footage of just like random things. And all that trailer promises is it's going to be different. It's not what you're expecting. It's so clearly pushing against what Suicide Squad was as a film.
It also pushes the fact there's a lot of actors in this film.
Yeah.
It's a really huge cast, and it's a cast full of enough named faces that you couldn't afford to have them just as cameos. Or at least you wouldn't tout them in the trailer in this fashion if they were meant to be cameos. So for me, I'm sort of a bit worried about this in terms of how many people are meant to share the spotlight, because we had a problem with the first one in that it was edited like dog shit, and by a music video house or trailer house,
yeah.
They cut the film together, and so the editing and the sort of the space each character got on screen was not well shared. Do you think they're going to manage that any better with this lot?
Well, I think James Gunn as a director and writing as well, which is, I think, the significant credit there. I think I have a lot more faith in him just because he's already used to dealing with sort of relatively large ensembles because he's responsible for the Guardians of the Galaxy films. Whereas, obviously,
especially in this tone,
this is the biggest film that he's made by a country mile.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think he will understand using the Suicide Squad sort of the sort of special thing about the Suicide Squad, which is they're all kind of maybe supervillains or like anti-heroes who can be... there's a bomb embedded in their necks by their handler, Amanda Waller, who can just be detonated at some point if they go off task. So I think we must be seeing some sort of almost like Expendables type film.
I like that. That would be quite nice. Also, you got Viola Davis as the handler, I think, or the lead, or the director in this one, which is, I love Viola Davis. She's good in everything, so that would be good.
This is the thing that I think is really interesting about the Suicide Squad, which sort of crystallizes again that point of this being more of a multiverse rather than just sort of a section of sequels and
cinematic universe.
Yeah. So things like some of the best parts about the original Suicide Squad movie, Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, Viola Davis' Amanda Waller, even Captain Boomerang, Jai Courtney as Captain Boomerang. He's very fun in the role. He does a good job.
Yeah.
They're all still here as a member of this cast, alongside all this new set of characters, and it's touted not even as a spiritual sequel or anything else.
Is it a reboot, like a soft reboot? Do you think? Or...
it's very unclear what it is. So I think all they've done so far is to try and tell you that it's going to be so different to Suicide Squad as we've seen it so far.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not going to be disconnected from it, because it can't be, because we're still seeing... This is now the third time we've seen Harley Quinn in a movie.
What you saw was, with Birds of Prey, you almost saw a soft reboot of that imagining of the Harley Quinn character that was so poorly done to by the overall edit and the relationship with the Joker in the Suicide Squad film. So the Birds of Prey was their chance to basically soft reboot that character. And now maybe it seems to me like with this kind of distancing from the first movie, but keeping the parts that stayed popular with audiences, it seems like they're trying to edge towards maybe like a soft reboot of that. This is a franchise, because they tried to make it a franchisable thing when the marketing for the first film, but it was a bad film that people didn't go and watch enough of. And it released, it had Panic at the Disco releasing the worst Queen cover we've ever seen, which is very impressive.
I do think, just as a sort of closing thought on it, I think it's entirely sort of speculative. It's not grounded in any evidence because we don't have a lot of information about these films yet anyway. I potentially see them using the huge cast of like anti-heroes / villains in Suicide Squad as one of the new ways they route their films together.
Oh, interesting. So that would be quite an interesting way of doing, like, you have all the backstory and backdrops of all these villains established in other films, which people might go and see more of because of the casts in it. And then you weave your other films, like, the Flash goes up against Killer Shark, or whatever it is. But you've had the backstory done for him already. But I guess, like, Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn becomes a more compelling villain now that you've had all that other work done with her.
Yeah, I could potentially see them pulling characters like Polka Dot Man and Captain Boomerang and sort of these really sort of C and D-list villains, and maybe being like, well, you've seen what their deal is because that's how they fight people in the Suicide Squad, and then they pull these villains. They like escape from the Project X or whatever it's. No, that's X-Men.
Yeah,
whatever
X-Men, but it's whatever.
Whatever the secret government plant thing that runs the Suicide
Project
Squad
Anti-Hero.
I think it would be interesting to see them try and link them that way. I think it's a potential way they could do it.
So that's interesting. We're sort of seeing the DC Cinematic Universe as it was in the Snyder series of films kind of dissolve almost, and they're kind of trying to reform it around a different image of this Suicide Squad or Birds of Prey-esque thing, almost led by Margot Robbie, we might say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much for chatting with me, Martin. I hope you've all enjoyed this very brief little discussion of the DC Cinematic Universe and reaction to a couple of trailers we've just seen. Thought it'd be an interesting one to drop. That should be out hopefully tomorrow if I get my act together. But yeah, thank you all very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
What we're seeing with this release of a second cut of a Snyder film, demonstrating that. That's me. Got the Rona.
Guys, such a bad film. It's literally killing you.
Zack Snyder gave me the Rona. Martin Docherty 2020. No, so this